Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 102nd Learn with Lorna. I'll wait a second for people to join us before we get started. It's always reassuring when I see the figures going up and I know that it's going out fine and people are there, and then people start to say hello, and then it's all good because I know that it's going out fine. So welcome to the 102nd Learn with Lorna. This week we're looking at the subject of Mary Beith, which I'll come on and give a huge amount more detail on in a second. So welcome to this episode. If you're new to the series, welcome to Learn with Lorna. My name is Lorna. I'm the Community Engagement Officer with the Highland Archive Service. We have in the Highland Archive Service 4 archive centres where we look after the historic documents relating to the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. We have one in Inverness, the Highland Archive Centre. We have the Skye and Loch Archive Centre in Portree, Nucleus, the Nuclear and Caithness Archives in Wick, and Loch Aber Archive Centre in Fort William. This series, if you've been watching from the beginning of all 100 episodes, you'll know is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of talks. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we're very, very grateful for that. And thank you, as always, to those of you who've done that. It really makes a difference to what we're able to do. So thank you. Morning, everyone. Nice to see everyone's hellos coming in. I always love it, everyone like Linda there saying hello to everybody else as well. We're a wee family now. So welcome to the second episode in this month's theme, looking at the women in the Highland and the Highland Archive Service collections. Thank you for all your views and comments last week when I was looking at the MacLean sisters. I was really glad to hear so many people agreeing with me that they were quite amazing in their different ways. And speaking as well of wonderful and interesting women, I really hope that you've been able to see my conversation with Professor Dame Sue Black. She has long been a hero of mine in terms of the extraordinary and difficult work she's done in war zones, in assisting the police in identification, all sorts of different things. And I feel a real sense of accomplishment in having spoken to her and met with her. So I hope that you are able to watch that. The blog and the film are available on our website and on our YouTube channel, so please do go and have a wee look at those. So this week we're looking at the work of another woman, Mary Beith, whose papers we hold at the Highland Archive Centre in Inverness. I'll start, as I like to do, by telling you a little bit of context about the collection itself, the kind of physical context. So the collection is 7 boxes. It dates from 1858 to 2011, and it comprises a real mixture of things. So there's paper, audio cassettes, video cassettes, slides, computer discs, a real range of material. And the collection came to us in 2015. So who was Mary Beith? Well, Mary Beith was a writer, author, and journalist, an expert in herbal medicine and Gallic culture. She wrote a regular column for the West Highland Free Press for many years, entitled Making the Cure, and she also wrote a book called Healing Threads. So we're going to look at Mary Beith's story. So Mary was born in London in May 1938. She lost her mother to cancer at the age of 4 or 5, so a big loss to deal with at a very young age. She lived briefly with her grandmother and then with her father, who went to be a civil servant in Jamaica. So quite an eventful childhood. Her father suffered from tuberculosis, and she also contracted tuberculosis in a milder form, but it did result in her having severe asthma. Now, after leaving school, she went to teach English in Germany briefly before enrolling on a journalism course in Poole in the south of England. So again, another woman with a very strong connection to words, to language, to an ability to communicate. And I think that's maybe why I'm drawn to her story a little bit. I always find it really interesting when people have the ability to absorb information and convey information. Now, Mary Beith spent many of her early years in journalism focusing on difficult subjects. She did investigative work at newspapers in London, in Manchester, in Glasgow, settling just outside Glasgow. In 1975, she was named Campaigning Journalist of the Year for her undercover work in an animal testing laboratory. And if you're interested in finding out more about the journalism side of Mary Beith's life, then if you just type her into any search engine, you'll see an extraordinary image that she was responsible for. She smuggled a camera in with her to an undercover place in an animal testing laboratory where beagles were being had enforced masks put on them, where they were forced to smoke to see the effect of cigarettes on the body of the animals. So quite an extraordinary image, which she became very famous for. She also spent time doing other undercover work. So she spent time in Northern Ireland, where she was working undercover and was involved in a bombing. That resulted in her becoming quite deaf. She also won awards for her research into the care of elderly patients in psychiatric hospitals. And apparently, she felt that that was some of her most important work that she had ever done, looking at these patients in long stay mental hospitals. So she clearly had a very clear passion and ability and talent for research. Now, in the 1980s, Mary Beith was at a turning point in her life. Her children had reached an age where they were either leaving home or finishing school. Mary herself had recently been divorced, and she had suffered very, very seriously from meningitis. She had started to write freelance for magazines at that point on all sorts of subjects, including archaeology. But as a result of all of these things, the children reaching a certain age, her divorce, her very recent serious illness, she decided on a complete change of lifestyle and change of scenery, and she moved to the Highlands and settled in Melness in Sutherland. She had holidayed and worked in the Highlands as a teenager, and that was where the connection to the area came from. Originally, her plan was to stay just for a couple of years to research for a book about traditional healing and traditional medicine in the Highlands and Islands. And she was awarded an £8,000 grant from the Sir John Macdonald Study Fund, which she used to travel around the Scottish Islands gathering material for this research project. But it soon became clear to her that she had found a community which had embraced her and which she had embraced, and also that her work on traditional medicine, Gallic traditional culture and healing had become a subject that she would never put down again. She would never be able to put down that particular subject. It was in 1989 that Mary started a fortnightly column for the West Highland Free Press, again on those subjects for which she was starting to become renowned: Gallic culture, herbal medicine, and traditional healing. And the column was called Déanamh a Dhéis, which is, as I said, making the cure. And we hold many of Mary Beith's research notes, her drafts, her published articles, and on a wide range of subjects from all of those in all of those areas around plant lore, around traditional remedies. Here is an extract from one of them. In the days when children often went barefoot, especially in summer, injuries to the feet were a common hazard and varied from wee scratches and hacks to quite nasty cuts. George MacLeod of Dalmore on the west side of Lewis remembers that a popular remedy for the hacks in your feet was to twist bits of wool around the sore bare feet. It's the oil in untreated sheep's wool that affects the remedy. Lanolin, the fat derived from it, is still used a great deal in ointments as it doesn't go rancid and is recognised in pharmacy for its ease of absorbency by the skin. Town dwellers can to this day buy wee packets of sheep's wool to twist around calloused toes and relieve any pain. Going barefoot in winter may not be much fun, but in summer the sense of freedom is rather pleasant, and certainly, the odd injury aside, is healthy for the feet. I can remember having the occasional cut on bare feet and still wanting to kick my shoes off at any opportunity. Sometimes, though, injuries to feet from sharp stones, bits of glass, or barbed wire can be rather nasty. When Murdo Gillies of Shawbost was young, he got a badly festering hurt on his foot. Anna Mackay, who came originally from Arnall and was a neighbour of Murdo's in the 1920s, applied a black snail as a leech to the wound for 3 or 4 days. She also put a hand on my pulse and listened to my breathing, remembers Murdo. You'll be all right, she promised him, and so he was. So you can see there her writing her newspaper article with both factual knowledge learned from sort of academia, but also knowledge learned from the community and experiences that people have had. Here's another extract from November 1989 that she wrote for her column for the West Highland Free Press. And I'm seeing your comment there saying, Jane, that it keeps crashing, but I'm seeing other people saying it's okay. So I hope it's okay. If not, please catch it on YouTube later on. It will be absolutely fine on there. So here's another extract from Mary Beith's column from November 1989. And it's entitled Drastic Cures for a Dose of the Miseries. Are you feeling low, irritable and nervy, depressed with the shortening days, long nights and gloomy weather? Right, let's wallow in it. A thorough and melodramatic overdose of the fearsome was seen by the Gaels as one of the best cures for the miseries. The sufferer would be taken to an old ruined church, the spookier the better, at sundown and left there alone and presumably unable to escape until sunrise the next day. The recovery rate was claimed to be high. Not only would the patient not care for another dose, but nothing ever might seem quite so bad ever again. It would have done little for the severely affected. Indeed, it doesn't take much to imagine them being driven completely over the top in their nerves if they were left overnight in an old churchyard. But at least it would have sorted out the malingerers. And she goes on to say that this is she gives some examples of people who have experienced that. And then she says, so graphic is the writer's description of the cure that probably he witnessed it on at least one occasion. In concept, it seems very much the same as modern electroconvulsive shock therapy, the shock having a beneficial effect to a depressed patient. Really interesting there, she's seeing something that traditionally happened and then saying that maybe there's just a modern application of it. So it was just giving a shock to the system. And maybe a few hundred years ago, that would be by being frightened in a graveyard overnight. And maybe at the time she's writing, it's to do with electric shock therapy. But the principle doesn't change. So you can see there in those two examples how much, as I said, that Mary gathered information from numerous sources, from locals, from books, from journals, and other places. And that's really apparent in this collection as well. There are copies of articles, publications, and journals, including the Pharmaceutical Journal, the Gallic Society of Inverness, ancient Gallic medical manuscripts, the Celtic Monthly, Scottish Society of the History of Medicine. So there's a range of material there that she's accessing to collate this information together. And so she clearly delighted from gaining knowledge and learning from other people about these subjects of healing and tradition and health. I think that's particularly important on a subject that has such a local focus. You know, she's narrowing down to Gallic culture and Gallic tradition. And therefore her recognition of the importance of speaking to the local community and gathering information from that local community is really important. Here's an example of something that came in. She had spoken on a radio program about this subject and received letters from people who had said, "Oh, here's some of my family stories to add to your collection." And it says that the article that was just sent to her in a letter from a lady in Skye says, a recent programme on the radio regarding the medicinal qualities of bogbean has set some of us remembering our granny's own knowledge of herbs. I expect in the old days when doctors were far and few between, people had to go to nature to find cures for some of their ailments, and I expect that is what has given rise to the old wives' tales that Martin Martin in his book mentioned many of the plants and seaware used by the people of the islands. He tells us of a Harris man who wore a certain plant sewn into the neck of his coat to prevent his seeing visions, the second sight. And he told him that he was no longer troubled with the second sight since he started wearing the plant. Probably a lot of the old cures have been retained in a sort of folk memory and handed down orally, mostly in country districts. But even in places like Inverness, when I was born and brought up, we had a vague idea of the healing powers of some plants. For instance, if we were stung by nettles, we immediately rubbed the area with a dock leaf and had no after effects. The present craze for health food is considered a new idea, but as far as I can see, the islanders' diet of the 20s and 30s was a very much a wholesome diet and similar to many ideas today which are considered modern. One of the most well-known was the use of raspberry leaf tea to ease the period of pregnancy. We scoffed at that as an old wives' tale, but now it is advocated for such use in health shops and recommended by some of those who write about childbirth. And this person who's writing to Mary Beith with all these stories continues to say, probably most of us had met old wifies who have had their own cures for their ailments. One Borach I knew kept a raw potato cut in half in his coat pocket to ward off rheumatic pains. Another swore by celery and celery soup. Another old lady told me that whenever she felt rheumatic pain, she put a string of amber beads around her neck and the pain left her. Perhaps someone with a knowledge of all of this could compile a list of them, and instead of eating so much junk food, we could eat some of the wholesome food that our grannies ate. So you can see there that we're always connecting with her, writing to her, sending her information to add to this huge corpus of material that she was gathering. And in her turn, Mary Beith then dispersed the knowledge. So obviously she wrote through the West Highland Free Press, that regular newspaper article, but also, as I mentioned, she gave lectures, radio broadcasts, and wrote publications on these subjects. And in 1990, Mary Beith was given a lecture award for her work. And the lecture and the award were given in memory of one Hetty Munro, which people who have watched this series for any length of time will know I did a previous episode on Hetty Munro. She was frequently called upon to give advice and expert opinion to a range of different people, from individuals who wrote for a bit of advice with an interest in the subject, right to medical societies and professional bodies. This is an extract from a 1989 letter that she received from the Joint Academic Department of Child Health. And to give some an idea of the level of this organisation, this was a joint academic department for child health between St Bartholomew's Hospital in London, the London Hospital, the Queen Elizabeth Hospital for Children, and the University of London. And they were writing to Mary Beith in Melness, asking for her knowledge on the subject of child medication. So this is the letter. Dear Ms Beith, Dr Black of the Department of Celtic Studies at Edinburgh University recommended that I contact you with an inquiry into Scottish aspects of the subject of paediatric herbal remedies. I've had difficulty in identifying and locating the best sources and references to the Celtic approach for children. Would you have a reading list, perhaps on your own work? Several topics in particular are of interest to us. For instance, we have a number of children being treated by a local herbalist with frankincense and myrrh, and we are tracing the history of this as well as we can. And he goes on to say it's particularly important to us to dissect out the Celtic influence from others in our varied community. So a real importance for the academic community at that point to understand what the different treatments could be that might have come from herbal remedies and traditional remedies, but also to differentiate those between where they have originated from. And so can Mary Beith give specific information about the Celtic and Gallic remedies. And the letter that she wrote in response was very long, pages long of advice to this institution. But I wanted to share just the opening of it with you because she opens her reply by saying, "Many thanks for your intriguing letter inquiring about herbal remedies for children. I am delighted at long last that serious interest is being taken in the Celtic approach to herbal medicine. But that said, it's not always easy to define the purely Celtic remedies or to separate them from the seemingly unending or unearthing of such remedies. One of the reasons for this is that cross-fertilization of ideas and methods of treatments has happened more fully and at a much earlier date than was hitherto realized. The use of frankincense and myrrh in treating children, for example, would have had an Arabian or at least a Middle Eastern origin. Another obvious pointer is that certain plants have specific uses and would have been used widely in widely separated areas for very much the same cure. So she goes on to speak about how to identify things that are specifically Celtic or Gallic in origin. And she says it's not before time that this is being looked into by people such as yourself. The present proliferation of herbal medication, good, bad, and indifferent, has already seeped into the Highlands, with the result that people are confusing their own traditional cures with ones hailing from the south of England and heaven knows where else. Recently, a herbal nursery garden centre in Rossshire sent me a brochure promoting old Highland cures, which contained, for example, references to foxgloves as having been used here to cure heart ailments. How dangerous! In fact, foxgloves were not used in the Highlands for this, but to restore patients following a fever. So she's talking there about the danger that there can be in getting this information wrong. And one of the things she refers to in that particular article is the influence and the resulting confusion of different cultures and traditions, and those traditional medications overlapping each other and blurring the lines of what was a Highland tradition and what came from elsewhere. And this was a real interest in hers. I suppose, inevitably, if you're going to write about one thing, you need to separate it, remove the layers of other things from it. And so the collection also contains information and natural remedies and healing practices from the Far East and the Middle East and other places around the world, illustrating the way that knowledge and methods and ingredients transported as people began to travel more worldly in the past centuries, the way that knowledge and information started to spread. Here's excuse me, here's an extract from some notes she received from two ladies called Mary Karam Kiat and Margaret Clark Keatings, and this is entitled Lebanon, Land of the Cedars. And these two ladies have written to her about traditional healing and medication in Lebanon that she can then apply against traditional Highland things, either for comparison or to check where there's been a blurring. Every cultural group has its own tried and true remedies using local herbs and household ingredients. Here are a few selected from Lebanese daily life today and yesterday. Anise, seeds from a plant relative to the parsley family, which are cultivated for flavouring and also for home remedy. Boiled, made into tea and sweetened, it is given to soothe colic and indigestion. Babies here are given anise flavoured syrup in their milk for colic. It is liked in puddings and candies and cakes, ground up or whole. It is also said to soothe female pains. Another extract looks at olive oil and says warm olive oil is substituted for liniment in Lebanese households. It is rubbed on the bodies of babies and sick children to relax them. Olive oil soothes rheumatic pains and stiffness in adults, and sometimes taken as a laxative. So you can see there just the amount of information that that she's actively gathering from across the world. And so having done that, having gathered this huge array of material, she was able to complete her original aim and objective, which was to publish a book on the subject. And Healing Threads was published in 1995. And Jen, I'm seeing your question there. If publications are still available, they are indeed. You can still purchase a copy of Healing Threads. And this is a piece of writing written by Mary Beith in which she explains the process that she had gone to, how she had come to be inspired to write this book, and how she had done the work. And she introduces the book by saying, it was over a probably not very healthy plate of fish and chips in Glasgow in January 1980 that the matter was decided. Ronnie Black, now senior lecturer in Celtic Studies at Edinburgh University, was cataloguing the Gallic manuscripts in the National Library and had brought along photocopies of pages from medical works composed in the Highlands in the Middle Ages. He asked, would I look into Gallic traditional and official medieval medicine and write a book so that people would know about a neglected area of their heritage? It was an order rather than a question, but the subject was fascinating and had interested me for a long time. Arrogantly, I supposed it would take a couple of years, but the more the subject unfolded and the more ramifications it disclosed, the more I understood by what he had meant by the fact that the subject had been neglected, and the more I became aware of my own ignorance. The neglect actually verged on abuse. Here was a Highland past far removed from battles, oppression, and spurious glamour, with people showing a confidence in skill and knowledge, and hereditary physicians combining formal European training with native learning. So she goes into more detail there about the lack of work that had been done. How had the Highlands had this huge wealth of knowledge, of medical knowledge and remedies that had been completely and utterly ignored. And she goes on to complain about the danger of the way it could be treated. There are several standard approaches to writing about traditional medicine, she says. Austere, nitpicking and unreadable anthropological commentary, the ooh-ah weren't they quaint school of non-thought, and the new agey ancient wisdom from a golden age persuasion. But actually, she says, common sense was the keynote of Gallic medicine. Certainly there were mystical elements, but they were advised by an understanding of the human mind, and the seemingly bizarre use of animal products begged a proper context. After all, extracts from animals are still used in modern medicine in the guise of liquids, powders, and pills, and further masked now by scientific terms. So you can you can see there that she's saying, don't make the mistake of thinking that this is a either we should patronize these people and go, oh look how clever they were in the past, okay, or describe it as something hugely mystical and sort of spooky and superstitious. She's saying, actually, let's not patronize the people in the past who had a very capable knowledge of medicine that has actually developed into our medical practices of today. She finishes this particular paragraph by saying, I have no medical or herbal qualifications, and Healing Threads is not written as a guide for self-medication. Indeed, I would have had precious little knowledge to put into this book at all had it not been for the great help of many people throughout the Highlands and Islands and beyond. What I have tried to do is to simply tell a story that was much in need of telling. And she summarised the book as the first full-length book devoted solely to the traditional medicines of the Scottish Gaels. The first 9 chapters give a background history, and the second part of the book gives actual remedies and methods. The chapter on the medieval physicians tells how a code used by them is based on the ogham carvings of the Picts and may be a key to an abiding mystery. This book shows that the Highland life embraced science as well as art and reveals a highly intelligent medieval society and a knowledgeable tradition of healing, always eager to embrace new ideas and experiment with our native materia medica. This book has been extensively researched with a view to showing that there is a great deal of worth to be found in our own traditions. So you can see there all of those things that she'd done to that point, the journalism, the research, the ability to communicate with people and gather information and then transfer it, comes to fruition across all her work, but particularly in this book. And the book was met with great success. And the collection that we hold at the Highland Archive Centre includes reviews of the book, correspondence, and evidence of appearances on things like BBC television speaking about the book. One review says, the book exhibits the depth and range of interests and diligence in research that have become this author's hallmark over the years, which I thought was particularly nice. Another review says, unlike many other treatments of this subject, whose emphasis is on the strange, often ghoulish nature of cures and esoteric shamanistic rituals, which only serve, saying all books often tend to only reinforce our feelings of superiority as thoroughly modern rational pragmatists, quite free from superstition. Healing Threads makes the case for a 20th century re-evaluation of the old ways. These old ways are, after all, the empirical base on which conventional medicine is founded, established over thousands, if not millions of years, by people no less intelligent and arguably by necessity more capable and more inventive than ourselves. So you can see it was an important seminal piece of work on this subject that Mary Beith researched and put together, and without doubt, a lifelong dedication and passion. And Mary Beith would continue to publish her fortnightly articles in the West Highland Free Press. She did that for over 20 years, and also go on to write children's books. The Gallic, the Magic Apple was translated into Gallic as well, which I believe was something she took great pride in. And having survived so many extraordinary things, that the bombing in Northern Ireland, threats, tuberculosis, meningitis, Mary Beith passed away in May 2012 at the age of 73, leaving a huge legacy behind her of research, of writing, of investigation, and not to mention her other legacy, her beloved children and grandchildren. We are very grateful to have her collection at the Highland Archive Centre and to be able to share her huge, extensive knowledge on this subject through things like this. So I hope that has been of some interest. I hope you've enjoyed it. Jane, I'm absolutely delighted to say that you were able to see there, you were able to get it to work. I will never understand why sometimes people see the film completely clearly and sometimes other people have issues. But just as a reminder, all of the previous episodes of Learn with Lorna are available on our YouTube channel, and they will, I am quite sure, work perfectly well on there. This one will join it very shortly. So thank you so much for joining me again this week. Next week's talk will be pre-recorded. It will be on the Women in our Lochaber Archive Centre collection. So thank you so much to my colleague Rory, who's been burrowing away and ferreting away in our collections in Lochaber for me to look for that. It will be pre-recorded because I'm actually in Fort William giving a talk to a Probus group on Thursday. So, but I will, as always, pick up your comments at the end. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for those who were saying they were able to see it coming through clearly. That's always a relief as I try to work out how to fix it. A reminder that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. That High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of talks. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we're very grateful for that. Thank you.